Hello, from here at my computer in Norwich, UK, to wherever you're logging in from. Thank you for your interest in this presentation, which will involve a short introduction and the reading of an extract from my poetic sequence, The Iceberg Project, which was developed as a kind of poetic observatory located in an imagined Antarctica. The poems present a variety of ways of seeing or reading ice and Antarctica. In addition to a poetic and a mythic approach, there is the scientific. Remote imaging tracks iceberg 68A from snowflake to calving, and the speculative. An iceberg towed by 2 tugboats is shown on its way to the United Arab Emirates to provide water. These different ways of seeing are represented by different forms and kinds of text: the haibun, the lyric, the haiku, the references to scientific papers, and also the contrasting photographs, images, and hand-drawn illustrations. The aim is not so much to privilege poetry as a way of seeing, but to explore some of its formal qualities and offer the creative critical approach as a way of thinking creatively from within a problem, which might be particularly suited to a consideration of the position of Antarctica in the Anthropocene. Antarctic ice acts as a living archive of Earth's climate history, and data collected as part of an ongoing scientific investigations allows for the measurement of current and modelling of future changes. It possesses the kind of thick time which David Farrier, in his book Anthropocene Poetics, associates with the Anthropocene. Air trapped in the ice allows for the coexistence of the past within the present. Its study in the present holds together the distant past and future. Jonathan Culler, writing about lyric poetry, has described its complex temporality in ways which can be compared to the thick time of ice. The poem exists within 3 potentially different time zones: that of the writer, that of the voice in the poem, which is not necessarily the writer's, and that of the speaker or reader of the poem, all brought together at the moment of reading, the iterable now of poetic time. The complexity of this lyric voice, echoing the temporality of ice, enables the single, conquering gaze to be set aside, and allows for the decentering of the human in a way which is potentially helpful in considering the position of the human within the Anthropocene. The Iceberg Project as a sequence explores these ideas in a number of ways. It is, first of all, a response to ecological crisis, responding to Timothy Morton's calling of the shaman to inhabit the charnel ground, his figure for ecological coexistence. The shaman is the animation of waste products, discarded plastic, and creatures destroyed by a warming climate, gathered together by the reader through the poems. One of those new immortals or mythic entities discussed by David Farrier in Anthropocene Poetics. The everyday of the Anthropocene is populated with seemingly mythic entities, whose temporality draws us to contemplate the prolonged presence of anthropogenic damage into the deep future, what Bastian and Tom von Doren have called new immortals, such as radioactive waste, PCPs, or microplastics. The temporality of the sequence is deliberately disrupted, evoking both ice and the thick time of the Anthropocene. In the full sequence, the shaman speaks in part 1, before being formally constructed or recognised, in a voice which emerges from a series of poems pointing to a time of crisis. The haibun have within their scope the deep time of geological research, and the iceberg poems are set in a speculative future. These various times come together in the final poem as the ice melts, releasing images from history along with the trapped air. Just as time is compressed and mixed, so are the different scales and perspectives from which things are viewed. There is the microscopic scrutiny of diatoms and the satellite imaging of ice movement. The shaman instructs the reader to gather the scattered fragments of a body found in different poems and, after taking flight, sweeps into the rift between iceberg and ice shelf before merging with the scientist and finally the iceberg itself. This blurring of identities mirrors the breached boundaries between the self and the environment which critics such as David Farrier, Timothy Morton and Tom Bristow have seen as characteristic of the peculiarly wrought and fraught intimacies of the Anthropocene. The flight of the shaman into the space between is significant. Between the reader and the writer, between the earth and the observer, between the poems on the page, there is space for different kinds of connections. The research for the Iceberg Project was varied. I'm no scientist, and the papers I read were in their detail largely inaccessible, to me at least. But the engagement with this material, alongside critical thinking, different kinds of Antarctic texts, and translations of traditional Arctic hunting poetry, for example, was enlightening. The process of writing enabled a kind of thinking from within the problem. Antarctica is somewhere from which we really do rethink our place on the planet, as Bristow said. And one of the exciting aspects of Antarctic research is an emphasis on interdisciplinarity and collaboration. This presentation offers poetry as an alternative method of interrogating material, setting it in dialogue within the white space of the page. I hope you enjoy the poems. If you're interested in the full sequence, I've uploaded it as an additional document. The Iceberg Project. Torn from rhizome and root, pale quills on stone they scribe themselves and something else, a sense beyond this still curated time, a beast browsing, stamping through the thick warm air, a breeze spinning a fallen frond, the water shallow. Leaf sinks, is covered, pressed, ghosted by a weight of silt and clay. Hammer sound on stone. A continent drifts, breaks up and drifts again, and finally settles south. Stone splits, releases a whispering of trees, this smoky imprint of the southern beach. Seasons change. Leaf falls, sinks, is covered, pressed. The creak of feet accompanies the shush of sledge on snow. This frozen world was wooded once. Who can tell the shaman from the song, this creature with its stitched together wings? Would you call it a song? Where is it coming from? Poor wretch, waiting to be made. Craters open, microbes ride out on stinking breath, wasted fingers click. From the valleys, ice flows into the shelf which, hinged on land, is floating on the sea. Then and now and what's to come exist as one continuum of ice, visible to the satellite's eye as patterned flow. Mountain walls compress, direct the stream. The earth below resists, is frozen into, shattered, etched, striated. These glaciers gather rocks and dust, grumble into microphones, are covered, foreshortened, responsive to change. They are iceways, pathways, bodies of ice. No human ear can hear time speeding up, the friction's heat, the water melted under ice. Animations model blue to red, degrees of speed, show tongues of fire are lapping at the sea. A simple matter of conversion. One iceberg, average Antarctic, equals drinking water for 1 million people over 5 years. There's too much melting ice in the world, isn't there? And not enough water. Solution: melt the iceberg for water. Gather dry bone skulls, tapered into beaks, and lay them out, a memory of birds, the long curve of ibis, the sharp hook of condor, the finch's pick. Through nose holes and eye holes, twist strong nylon twine, and let them dangle, the owlet's harpoon, the puffin's arrow, the dagger of crow. This is a speaking necklace, translated into its clatterings, its bony mutters, the work of tools, chip and chisel, sip and shred, spear and pluck. Should the need arise, these sharp bills can scribe skin, gouge flesh, pick locks. Hot eye sun unseen consumes its cover, glaring now above the trees. Ice shelf and sea ice are imaged, white and grey. Animated, sea ice pulses on the screen. Its rumpled skin, now thin and veined, now mottled thick, forms and breaks with the season's breath. Ice shelf and sea ice are imaged, white and grey. The white shelf splits, the crack lengthens, rift cuts along a line of weakness, branches, widens, breaks. 1,000,000,000 tons of ice let loose into the sea. Ice shelf and sea ice are imaged white and grey, rocked between the ice rises, cradled on the waves, at last, rotated by the clockwise drift, this island turns. Securing a berg, one which has escaped naturally, a good size, say 3 kilometres squared and 3 kilometres deep for a steady keel, tabular, to reduce the risk of rolling, high length to width ratio, to lessen drag. We will deploy 2 tugboats and lasso the berg. Observe this fine articulation of plastic, this skeleton wing. Test its fluency, its possible range. Twist me lengths of animal gut and string me tendons. Gather me feathers and give me flight. Clouds rake a pale moon over the chimneys. Vast wings unfurl. Bat skin cracks. Into the rift on the downdraft I swoop, time stirred and broken by an ice-rending so vast that comprehension crumbles into ice heaps at the cliff foot. I ride the air radiating from ice walls, the sheer slip sheen of ice light, the jumble of icefall on a frozen sea, mastering between. I will fill the silence with a sound and set it pulsing, a high-pitched whine above a lower note, stir the air and keep it whirling, beating, threshed with noise until the snow is driven into spectres, a flurry of white spun from the ground by the wide whirling of blades. The body of a helicopter hangs in moving flakes, and as the skids touch down, there is an unsettling, a rolling of tumbleweed snowballs, a tilting forwards. From the slowing of rotors, the choking diminuendo, I will unwind her, place my hands over her hands, shiver into her skin. On the slow turn of the Weddell gyre, the great berg moves. Will the tow lines hold? The meltwater seeps over the edge, and with it the atmospheric record, openings into empty rooms, the skeleton of bed frames, a desiccated into the sea slips a chill stream running from a deep keel. The shudder of eruptions, the pale ash of winters lengthened. Here is no water, only rock. Homo erectus crossing the plains, marching with the teratorn, the mammoth and the mastodon across a future page. The cicada sings in the dried grass of the desert land crackling. Fissures fill with meltwater, freeze and widen. The slow hall over stony ground recalled in cracks and groans of ice, fracturing, fire, spitting, wood cracking, trees falling, black bones in a burnt-out car. If there were the sound of water only. On the slow turn of the Weddell gyre, the great berg moves. Across the ice plain, streams are chattering, an animated babble of water consonants tripping into vowels. White men in houses on the sea, bodies in ditches, drains and fields, the ice record of stopped breath. When I look up ahead, up the white road, there is always another one walking beside you. Cities are drowning, the telephones are silenced, numbers pouring out of continents. Water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Fingers hooked on fences, faces bound against the dust, corruption on the air. This tabular flatness, cratered into blue, a meltwater lake absorbing sky. The measured turn of cogs, their greased fit, the shuttle of spindles, the rattle and crash of coal, the billow of wasted smoke. On the slow turn of the Weddell gyre, the great berg is thinning, the girdle slips. Birds fly off course, bewildered. An underbelly, hollowed by the waves' lick, its salt scouring into caves which, at the ice edge boom, glow green. The berg side splits and sinks, is followed by a rush of wings.